Few dare to openly discuss what happens to an elderly person's soul. There's a silent respect, almost a social agreement, that prevents many from addressing this point clearly. But the truth needs to be told. Growing old doesn't mean disappearing. And when the body begins to fail, the mind slows down, and social connections become more fragile, the soul remains alive, present, and observant. Stephen Hawking, even confined to a limited body for decades, never ceased to affirm that consciousness wasn't a prisoner of the flesh. He believed there was something beyond physical limits, something that persisted. This isn't about religion. It's about a truth that defies even the most rigid science. Aging doesn't erase who we were. On the contrary, the soul seems to become clearer, more evident. When we stop ignoring this, we begin to see the value of those who have lived longer than many dare to imagine. Many people avoid thinking about what happens to the soul of someone who has lived 70, 80, or 90 years, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of ignorance. But when we understand that the end of physical life isn't the end of being, something changes. The most respected British physicist of the 20th century believed that the human mind was capable of touching dimensions that we don't yet understand. Hawking didn't speak in spiritual terms, but his conclusions open space for what many feel and can't explain. What if, behind matter, there's a field of consciousness that expands precisely when the body retracts? Subscribe and show your support if this question resonates with you, because what's to come is a necessary reflection. It's not easy to talk about this, but we must, especially for those who already feel time acting upon them, because the soul doesn't age, it merely reveals itself with greater strength. There's a common phenomenon among the elderly that few notice. As the years pass, many say they feel a kind of natural detachment, as if something is preparing them for another type of existence. It's not giving up, it's transition. Science doesn't precisely explain this feeling, but it's present in countless cultures, accounts, and experiences. Stephen Hawking himself said that the universe wasn't hostile, but indifferent. This phrase, seemingly cold at first glance, hides an important key. The indifference of the universe may not be rejection, but freedom. The soul, when nearing the end of material life, seems to acquire a broader view of things. It sees with distance what once seemed crucial. There's serenity in this. And this serenity isn't apathy, it's understanding. The body weakens, but something inside seems to become more lucid. Various studies with elderly individuals report that, in their final years, many experience more vivid dreams, memories returning with detail, and even the sensation of reunions with people who have already passed on. To medicine, this is brain activity. To those who live it, it's more than that. Hawking was a rare example of someone who touched the limits of human existence with a sharp mind, even when the body no longer responded. His lucidity was a way of proving that essence doesn't yield to physical limitations. Many elderly people, even in silence, feel this separation between body and soul clearly. They perceive that something is standing out internally. It's as if a part of them is going ahead, preparing itself. And those who listen to them attentively notice. They have long gazes, significant pauses, phrases that seem to come from another place. It's no coincidence that as people age, many begin to seek explanations about the meaning of life. It's as if, instinctively, they know that there's a final stage underway, not a stage of loss but of realignment. Stephen Hawking was a proponent of the idea that knowledge should serve to broaden our understanding of our existence, and this includes death, not as an end, but as a passage. The soul of an elderly person, contrary to what many think, isn't fading away. It's returning to a center, to a point of origin. When an elderly person remains silent for long periods, when they observe more than they speak, they may be hearing something that doesn't belong to this world. This isn't about fantasy or romanticization. It's merely the realization that silence carries a wisdom that few know how to interpret. In their later years, many elderly people begin to see life with different eyes. Small joys gain immense value, and great pains become less heavy. This shift in perspective is common, but rarely valued. Stephen Hawking, even in the face of the greatest difficulties, affirmed that while there's life, there's hope. This hope for many elderly people transforms into acceptance, not as resignation, but as liberation. The soul no longer fights against time. It surrenders to what it always was, continuity. Those who have had the chance to accompany someone in this phase know what this is like. They are gentle gestures, few but profound words. It's the soul manifesting itself more clearly, without distractions. And that's where the truth lies that few have the courage to say. The soul of the elderly doesn't disappear. It finally reveals itself. There's a tendency to treat aging as a process of emptying. Less strength, fewer clear memories, less space in society. But when you look closely, what really happens is a refinement. The soul sheds illusions, urgencies, excesses, and with that, what remains is what has always been essential. Stephen Hawking said that despite physical limitations, he could still travel the universe with his mind. This is more than a metaphor. For many elderly people, the body may not keep up, but thought, intuition, and perceptions gain intensity. It's common to hear that someone older has begun to see life more clearly. This isn't just maturity. It's a type of consciousness that begins to expand when the body no longer needs to prove anything. The soul, unlike the body, has no hurry, no pain, no limits. And in the silence of old age, it finds space to speak. What many don't realize is that this inner expansion doesn't need words to be felt. An elderly person can be sitting in silence for hours, and during that time something profound may be happening. Stephen Hawking lived almost his entire adult life with severe motor limitations, but his mind produced ideas that transformed modern science. This reminds us that the soul doesn't depend on movement to manifest itself. Similarly, many elderly people seem to disconnect from the world little by little, but internally they are connecting with something greater. This isn't alienation, it's immersion. It's as if they're reviewing their own existence from within. The past returns, emotions are revised, choices are observed with a different perspective. And in this process, the soul gains shape, organizes itself for something to come. It's a silent but real work. There's something curious that human mind researchers identify in elderly individuals, an increase in emotional sensitivity and empathy. Even with advancing age, many demonstrate more compassion, more care for others. This is a clear sign that the soul isn't regressing, it's maturing. Stephen Hawking, even with his rational approach, never denied the importance of human connection. He said that we are all part of a large whole. When an elderly person begins to demonstrate this broader connection, even without words, it's a sign that something is preparing. It's as if, after so many years of life, the soul understands that the meaning of everything lies in the connection between beings. And that's why, at this stage, many elderly people let go of judgments, resentments, demands. They begin to look at others with more tenderness. This is spiritual wisdom in practical form. It's important to understand that the soul of an elderly person isn't waiting for the end. It's building a beginning, not visibly, but deeply. Many report that in this phase they feel a presence, a kind of silent company, as if they are being guided. Stephen Hawking never stated this directly, but in several speeches he made it clear that the universe is more complex than any theory can explain. He defended the idea that we still know very little about the true nature of consciousness. And this consciousness, which we call the soul, reveals itself intensely in the final chapters of life. It's common to see elderly people talking to people who have already passed on, or smiling for no apparent reason. For some, this is just mental confusion. For others, it's the soul preparing for the reunion with what it always sensed existed. The truth that few have the courage to say is that the souls of the elderly are in full process of refinement, and this process is invisible to hasty eyes. Society, focused on youth, doesn't have the patience to observe this discreet blossoming. But it happens. Stephen Hawking was the portrait of a soul that didn't let itself be limited by the body, and that's exactly what we see, in silence, in the homes, nursing homes, and hospitals where thousands of elderly people live their final years. They're not just waiting, they're completing themselves. They're preparing to leave what is transient and return to what is essential. Each gesture, each look, each silence carries this internal movement. That's why many elderly people seem to be at peace even in the face of the end, because the soul has already begun to return home, and this isn't belief, it's perception. If we listen attentively, we'll realize that the elderly have something to say that goes beyond words. Their stories, their gestures, their silences reveal a wisdom that can't be learned in books. Stephen Hawking wrote theories about black holes and the origin of the universe, but he also taught us that, in the face of the mystery of existence, humility is fundamental. An elderly person who has gone through decades of joys, losses, mistakes, and learning carries within them a living library. And within it, the soul is organizing each volume, its closing chapters, highlighting lessons, reframing pains. This inner work, often solitary, is the noblest part of human existence. And even if the body is tired, even if the voice no longer has strength, the soul continues to work in silence, because it knows that its journey is far from over. There's a detail that often goes unnoticed by those around an elderly person. Over time, they begin to look more inward than outward. This internal movement is profound. It's as if, after decades of experiences, the soul decides to organize what it has lived. Stephen Hawking said that time is an illusion. And perhaps it is, because many elderly people report reliving moments from decades ago with impressive clarity. This return to the past isn't just memory, it's a kind of final assessment. The soul observes, understands, forgives, embraces. This happens in silence but with intensity. For those with sensitivity, it's visible in the distant gaze, the restrained smile, the long pauses. The elderly person isn't absent. They are present on another frequency. A frequency that doesn't demand haste, that isn't explained with logic, but that is understood with the heart. In this silent process, many elderly people begin to value simple gestures with a new intensity. A touch on the hand, a short conversation, an old song. All of this takes on another weight. Stephen Hawking, even using a computer to communicate, once said that the greatest miracles of life were in the small things. This perception is a clear sign that the soul, as it ages, no longer seeks the extraordinary. It finds the sacred in the everyday. And that's why many elderly people are moved by details that go unnoticed by others. It's not fragility, it's expansion of consciousness. It's as if the soul is training the gaze to see what has always been there, but was ignored for years. This new vision isn't rehearsed. It arises when time no longer runs, when the essential is revealed in gestures that speak louder than words. For some, aging is synonymous with loss, but for those who observe carefully, it's a process of revelation. The soul begins to detach itself from the identity it has carried for decades. The position, the title, the possessions no longer matter. What matters is what was lived, felt, shared. Stephen Hawking, who lost almost all bodily functions while still young, showed us that the value of existence lies in the content of the mind and soul. And many elderly people make this same movement, even in silence. They stop defining themselves by what they do and begin to recognize themselves by what they are. This change is profound, and it transforms the way they see the world. They begin to see others with more compassion, with more patience, because they know that time takes almost everything, except for the truth that each soul carries with it. Even those who don't believe in life after death feel that there's something unexplainable in this phase of life. The way many elderly people accept the approach of the end with serenity is a mystery that even science can't completely translate. Stephen Hawking, although skeptical about spiritual life, said that the universe holds secrets that we haven't been able to access yet. Perhaps the souls of the elderly are, in some way, touching these secrets, and that's why many begin to speak less than they think, to desire less than they feel, and to live more than they show. They are in transition, not because they are leaving, but because they are completing a cycle. And when a cycle is complete, there is silence, there is recollection, there is understanding. This isn't sadness. It's the end of a journey lived with depth. As it ages, the soul doesn't fall silent. It whispers. And whoever is willing to listen will hear. It's in their later years that many elderly people reveal thoughts that they have kept throughout their lives, confessions, advice, glances that say more than any speech. This isn't about neediness, it's about legacy. Stephen Hawking left us ideas that will continue to be studied for decades. In the same way, an elderly person leaves invisible marks on those around them, words that seem simple, but that echo for a long time. Small actions that teach more than great theories. When the soul approaches its point of return, it becomes transparent, and this transparency can be uncomfortable for those who aren't ready to see, but for those who accept, it's a gift, an invitation to see life with more depth, even when the days seem shorter. Many families don't realize that they live with true masters inside their homes, silent masters who no longer impose but suggest, who no longer show themselves but illuminate. Stephen Hawking, with all his genius, depended on constant assistance to live. Still, his influence crossed borders. He proved to us that limitation doesn't define anyone's worth. And the same happens with the elderly. Even if they need help, even if they no longer have total autonomy, they still carry a wealth that can only be accessed with presence and respect. When someone older speaks slowly or repeats themselves, they aren't being frail. They are trying to organize everything they have lived. They are trying to leave a message, a meaning, a legacy of wisdom. And to hear this, it takes more than ears. It takes attention. In the rush of modern life, it's common to forget to ask our elders what really matters. Their opinion on deep topics, their view on time, love, fear. And when we remember, it's often too late. Stephen Hawking knew that time is a precious resource. His life was a race against it, but also a lesson on how to use it. The elderly have time, but they don't always have someone to listen to them. And in this silence, many truths are lost. Their souls are full of answers that took decades to mature. But someone needs to be willing to ask calmly, to listen without haste, because it's not about old stories, it's about current wisdom. The soul of someone who has lived a lot has a clarity that can't be bought, taught, or imposed. It simply offers itself when there's space for it. The way we treat the elderly reveals much about the maturity of a society. When we ignore their signs, their needs, and their messages, we are turning our backs on the future that we will all face, sooner or later. Stephen Hawking said that the greatest enemy of wisdom isn't ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. We think we know enough, that we've heard it all, that there's nothing new in those who have aged. But we are wrong. The new isn't in what is unprecedented, but in what has been deeply understood, and this only the soul of an elderly person can offer. When we choose to listen, observe, and learn from them, we are actually expanding our own consciousness. We are accessing a dimension that goes beyond logic. And this dimension is where the soul expresses itself with greater clarity. Many elderly people can no longer move with agility, but they can touch hearts with a simple presence. This isn't fragility, it's depth. Stephen Hawking showed us that even without the body functioning, the mind and soul can reach unimaginable places. Similarly, an elderly person sitting in silence may be more connected to the essence of life than many who run all day, because they have already seen what matters, already lost what they thought they would never lose, already survived what seemed impossible. And now, at the end of the journey, they are ready to simply be. The soul at this stage doesn't need to prove anything. It just needs to be respected, embraced, understood. And when this happens, it flourishes. Even in its final hours, even in its last breaths, it can still teach something that's worth a lifetime. It's common for younger people to wonder what happens after death, but the elderly, for the most part, no longer ask so much. They feel that there's something, that it's not the end, that it's not empty. Stephen Hawking, even with a scientific view, made room for mystery. He admitted that there are forces, laws, and dimensions that we don't yet understand, and perhaps this is what the elderly experience behind the scenes of silence. They no longer need to understand, they just accept, not as submission but as wisdom. When you see an elderly person smiling at nothing, crying alone, or saying they saw a loved one, maybe it's not imagination. Maybe it's the soul already with one foot on the other side, showing that there's continuity, that there's more, and that this, even without explanation, can be felt. The final stage of life can be the most sacred if we know how to see it. Many treat this period as a wait, a long and silent farewell, but for the soul it can be the moment of greatest expansion. Stephen Hawking believed that even in the face of the end, the mind could still create, understand, touch the invisible. The elderly also do this, each in their own way, not with theories but with silences full of presence, with small gestures that reveal an inner world in transformation. When we look at this with respect, we understand that the soul doesn't disappear, it elevates itself. And when we allow ourselves to listen, we learn. Because what few have the courage to say is that the souls of the elderly are more alive than ever. They have only changed their language, and now they speak with the gaze, with the calm, with the truth of those who have seen it all. If you've made it this far, perhaps you're ready to look at the elderly with different eyes. Not as people who are leaving, but as souls who are revealing themselves entirely. Stephen Hawking taught us that the universe is vast, full of possibilities, and that consciousness may be the greatest of them all. The elderly, with their serene presence and their silent wisdom, show us that the soul is real, and that its journey continues, even when the body rests. Therefore, if this video touched something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. And if you want to follow more reflections like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there's much more to be said and every soul deserves to be heard, especially those that life took decades to mold.